Hey everyone, this is Jeff Palais, Ballotpedia's editor-in-chief. The Ballotpedia Society is made up of donors who've generously committed to making a monthly donation to Ballotpedia. These donors are key to supporting our mission and driving Ballotpedia's growth. Our week-long spring Ballotpedia Society membership campaign kicked off earlier this week on Monday. You can help us achieve our goal of adding 50 new Ballotpedia Society members. By joining, you'll provide invaluable support to our work delivering neutral, accurate, and reliable information to educate voters and citizens. Please visit donate.ballotpedia.org/Ballotpedia Society to sign up. Thank you for being an important part of our team. We couldn't do it without you.
Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we take a closer look at the week's top political stories. Ballotpedia connects people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for being with us. Today, we're joined by Joe Amditis, who is the Assistant Director for Products and Events at the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University, where he's also a professor. Joe hosts and produces the WTF Just Happened Today podcast and focuses much of his writing and research on local news ecosystems, collaborative journalism, innovation in the media industry, and of course, artificial intelligence. He recently released a free ChatGPT handbook that can help publishers learn how to use AI for local news. Joe, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so to start, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your own backstory. How did you end up interested in journalism, end up at the Center for Cooperative Media?
I got into journalism because I originally wanted to be a legal researcher, international human rights researcher, and I was serving as a research assistant right out of Rutgers, and I was reading these incredible, breathtaking stories about struggles against colonialism and imperialism and conflict and peace studies and conflict resolution. But they were so boring and so buried in these academic journals that I just was like, I need something more. I want to tell stories, but I can't do it this way, or at least I can't just do it this way. So I sort of started playing around with the idea of multimedia and digital media. I started my own local news site in New Brunswick, New Jersey, with a couple of friends of mine. And then we applied for a grant from the center for $4,000 micro grant to sort of do some investigative reporting. And we got the grant, and we all of a sudden were like, guess we have to really take this seriously now. And then I got rejected from grad schools that I applied that were out of my league. And I just started showing up to the business coaching and local news support workshops that the center was doing, because the center was the one who had offered the grants. And I just showed up every month and started hanging around and clinging around here. And turns out they took me in. I knew how to set up a PowerPoint, and that was the first inroad there. And so, yeah, I've just sort of been going at that pace for almost 10 years. I think 9 years on July 6th, I believe, 9 years at the center. And, over the years, I've heard from local journalists, local publishers, entrepreneurial publishers, some of the struggles and challenges that they have with technology. A lot of times, my job is to be looking ahead at the horizon while also, holding a hand back to get people up into the present. And there are a lot of things that local news publishers and journalists and reporters have to do on a daily basis, especially in these small staff newsrooms with 3, maybe max full-time staff. And they just simply don't have the time to research this stuff, to mess around with it. And luckily, I get paid to do that in some capacity. And so I try to make those learnings and, things that I've come across available for them to learn from, and try to apply those sort of narrative and storytelling techniques to help bring people in and make it more accessible, regardless of your digital literacy.
That is a valiant mission. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Center for Cooperative Media? What do you all do?
So the Center for Cooperative Media has been around since 2012. It was formed in response to the sort of chaos that was going on in New Jersey local media around the time. There were massive patch layoffs, and there were a whole bunch of restructuring going on. There was Hurricane Sandy that had just hit, and there was just general sort of disorganization. And the Dodge Foundation, Democracy Fund, and I believe the Knight Foundation took a chance on us, and they formed the center. It was then led by Debbie Gallant, who started one of the first hyperlocal news sites in the country, BaristaNet. And since then, it's sort of grown, it's changed, it's shifted. I showed up in 2014, so I'm currently the longest standing member of the center. And over the last 9 years that I've been here, we've really grown to not only support local news in New Jersey, but to study, showcase, and advocate for collaboration among journalists across the country and across the world. We have a research director who's done some really pioneering work on the structures and nature of collaborative journalism projects. And of course, we have a lot of programming going on still in the state around media equity, journalism access, translation, accessibility, all kinds of things that the sort of ecosystem of news publishers and media creators and civic-minded people need, but don't really have a centralizing sort of ecosystem manager, if you will, operator that can sort of build those connections, see what's coming, see what's needed, and try to connect those dots. And so that's where the center lies. And, it's the best job I ever had.
Very cool. Yeah, it sounds like a great resource for local newsrooms. Let's jump into the topic at hand, artificial intelligence, more specifically ChatGPT. You're actually our first guest in what will likely be a series because our editor-in-chief has a big fascination with this. I want to start by asking you how you personally first got involved with ChatGPT.
Yeah, so I've been following some of the things that OpenAI is doing for, I think it was like January of last year. It was early on, and I was coming across little things like, I think there was one called Octi, which had like a Gen Z translator where you could put in a phrase or a sentence and it would, add the word lit, fam, or something like that to it. And so there's little neat uses here and there. But I really started paying more attention. I think around July of last year, there was a lot of news articles coming out about GPT, and how it was growing and what it was capable of, the Curie model, GPT-2 and everything with text classification. I love nerding out over that stuff. And so in an effort to avoid doing the actual work I had to do, I started playing around with some of these tools. And then, I was on TikTok at 11:55 at night, one night, as you do. I'm scrolling and I come across a video, which I usually would skip by, the video where it's like, this is going to change, blah, 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 blah. And it was really hyped up thing. And I was like, oh, let me tab over and try it out on my phone. And I had just finished reading a book by Brandon Sanderson called The Lost Metal. It had just come out like 2 weeks before. This is obviously it's November 30th. And I stayed up for hours just having conversations about spoilers that were in this book. It was the wild, wild west days of ChatGPT where they were still sort of learning in the research preview what guardrails to put on it. And I remember texting myself as if I was going to forget the link and being like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. It just felt like a big shift. Like it felt different in a way that, just this sort of instantaneous restructuring, reshuffling, and conversational nature of it. It blew me away, like it blew most people away. And it has, and it still has, and more so these days, that sort of eye-rolling crypto bro sort of hype bubble that's sort of around a lot of these things, but in a much different way. At its core, it's very obvious to anyone who's ever touched it that there is at least some usability and, functionality to this, as opposed to the sort of regular cycle of tech hype and bubble and bust thing that goes on. And I see this as a much more than a simple text generator. And we can talk about that in a little more detail later.
So that night on TikTok was the moment where it kind of hit you in the face that this is going to be a big thing, has a potential to impact journalism and all sorts of areas in your life?
If I'm being completely honest, as a lazy person, I saw it as a way to save me so much time and doing the banal, monotonous, repetitive things that I have to do. Oh, I have a list of messy email addresses. Can you clean this up and put it into a bulleted list? Oh, I need this in a table format, like things like that I immediately was just started seeing what I could do, what it can't do, and pushing the boundaries of it. And the first thought that just permeated my brain throughout those first 3 hours in bed on my phone was, oh my God, I can never tell my boss about this because now I'm going to have so much more free time to do the work I want to do and not, fill out the invoices or whatever. Obviously, there's all kinds of data privacy concerns, especially back then. Now they have the data opt-out thing. But so I really saw that as the selfish, lazy person that I was at the time. I saw it as an opportunity to save me time, not having to do the boring stuff that I have to deal on that takes up so much of my time. And then allow me to have the bot sort of do that or parts of it and allow me to focus on the stuff that I really enjoy, that gets me excited, that people really need. And I was coming from this as a longtime user of Zapier already, which is a no-code automation tool that allows you to connect apps and have actions trigger based on certain events and things. And so that was sort of my mindset. I already had automated a lot of the rote tasks and routines. And so I saw this as an extension of that. And luckily, lo and behold, Zapier has been one of the leading integrations and plugins in ChatGPT in its current iteration. So that worked out really nicely, at least for me.
Very cool. So you had all this extra free time and you decided to write an ebook with that free time. And that was released back in March. So what made you want to create that resource? And why do you feel like it's important to have?
Well, when you have free time and you have a job, anybody who's had a job before knows that the job will find ways to fill that free time. But one of the things that got me, the reason I wrote the book, one of the main reasons is that I sort of for a long time, I held out against all those, get my ChatGPT handbook, my prompt handbook. Everybody wants to be a prompt engineer. This will 10x your business, 10x this. I'm just going to throw up if I hear the word 10x again in every headline, every tweet. But I finally bit, and I paid like $2, and I was like, that's $2. I'll buy this prompt handbook because I've been holding out, and I haven't. Maybe I'll take it to the next level. And instantly, it was obvious that it was just spit out by ChatGPT. Somebody was lazy. They got my $2. I got, and I said, you know what? That sucks. But what if I actually made a good one, and then also use that as an opportunity to learn Notion, because I've been wanting to mess around with Notion, and I usually need a project to learn something like that. And two, sort of organize my thoughts on this and actually get it down on paper. And I sort of did it as a side project, and I showed my boss, and she was like, oh my God, can we publish this? And so we worked on it. I have a bunch of people that I ran it by to make sure it was accessible and make sure it made sense. And then we shared it. We did a couple of events releasing it and stuff. And so far, the response has been really positive. It is immediately out of date almost the minute that I posted it, because this thing keeps changing so much. But I tried to focus on some of the fundamentals, the structural aspects of it, the focusing on the relationship between you and your computer that this affects. It's not just a text generator. I believe it's a fundamental shift in the way that we relate to and interact with our machines from a natural language perspective. And I think people need to see it more as that. So I tried to focus on that aspect of it while also sort of buying into the whole prompt engineering thing of the time, which I do believe, by the way, is going to be irrelevant within months, or at least much less prominent than I think people sort of wanted to predict that prompt engineer would be a $300,000 job forever and forever.
So on that note of irrelevancy, since ChatGPT came out, there have been a lot of competitors that have come online, like you said. Have you used any of those? And does the advice from your handbook apply somewhat to those tools as well?
I have used some of them. I've used a handful of them. My go-to is obviously, this will give you a sense. I am now a Bing boy. I use Microsoft Edge. I'm an Edge guy. I'm an edgy guy, if you will, now. Something I never thought I would say. Edge is now Chromium-based, so all the plugins and extensions from Chrome work with Edge. But it comes with, the beta version at least at the time, came with Bing AI Access, which uses ChatGPT or GPT-4 model. So when I needed online stuff, or when I wanted to just generate page takeaways, or today was like, I need a wireless mouse that has a USB-C dongle, and Amazon's not, cooperating. So I need this, and this, found one, boom, ordered it. So I do use that. I go back and forth. I still use ChatGPT for most of the stuff that I do, especially since I have the plugins access and the browsing access. But the the bot with the Quora one is actually surprisingly well. I haven't tried out the Claude 100K token limit one yet. I haven't gone there. The only one I've paid for is ChatGPT Plus, and then the API access through the Playground. But Bing is really good. Honestly, it's just good. It's fun, even though it's only 20 question limit. It's fun. Poe is really good for specific use cases. You can use it to reformat your Midjourney prompts if you want to use Midjourney. You can do all kinds of you can create your own bot preloaded with some information about you. But the big ones have been API access through Zapier and automating that through a combination of Airtable, Slack, and Google Sheets. And obviously the big boy ChatGPT. Bing is, again, it's really great. It's actually really great on the phone because you can talk into it and have it read the answers back to you. The mobile app for Bing is really good, but I haven't dove too deep into some of the other competitors. I'm really excited for the Claude expanded context window, though, because one of the big things a lot of the journalists I talk to and publishers do is they want to synthesize and distill transcripts from meetings, from public, from city council meetings, from events, from interviews. And it's just not there yet in terms of the context window for chat without some additional steps that I think they're not really at that level of setting up yet. So that'll be really interesting to follow.
When you were listing off those different tools, I was like, I don't know what he's talking about because this is so out of my depth.
Names are insane. There's a big list. I've been maintaining a giant list of additional tools and resources in the appendix of the handbook, which honestly I feel is the most valuable section, the parts that I didn't write. But that I'm trying to keep that as updated as possible. And also the AIexchange.com. It's two sisters, a woman named Rachel Woods, and I can never remember her sister's name, but she does a really good job. They do a really good job of organizing this stuff into digestible, understandable packages. So anybody from beginner to advanced can really dive in and get something out of there. And I link to them rigorously throughout the book.
Can you think of any specific examples where AI or ChatGPT specifically is being used in a newsroom?
Everybody wants to do the transcripts one and meeting notes as well. I think the things that I stress this in the book, the thing I think it's most useful for, especially if you're just testing this out, are the low stakes tasks, the things that are not going to see the light of day publicly. They're not going to have a name attached to it. We're talking like organizational stuff that is sort of the lifeblood of any organization, but is very tedious to do. One thing that I've seen people use it for, and that I personally use it for at the center, we have a partner newsletter that goes out every 2 weeks, right? And the woman who writes it, Cassandra Etienne, our assistant director of programming and membership, she has to comb through so much stuff from the New Jersey news ecosystem and distill it into little blurbs for what's going on. And Chad is really good at taking existing information and restructuring and repackaging it. It is the sort of like scare stories you hear on NPR or whatever, where I asked it from scratch to give me this information and it was wrong. It's like, yes, it's going to make stuff up. But if you give it stuff to work with and use it as a sort of reorganizational assistant there, it's really good. And so what I've done is we've set up like a little Airtable web clipper extension or a form where you can submit content, you submit copy, you submit a link, you submit, you choose from a drop down the vibe of the copy you want back. And then Zapier takes that, sends it back and forth to the API at chat, and gives me a list of 5 possible headlines for the newsletter blurb, a list of 5 possible social posts about this, with the vibe that you selected. So enthusiastic, educational, optimistic, critical, things like that. And that goes filtered down. And then my favorite aspect is make the case for why people in X community should care about this story or this information. And a lot of times that has been one of the most useful applications, because oftentimes we get so wrapped up in the content that we produce and the journalism we do, and it's sort of self-evident to us that people should care about this, but we sort of lose sight of some of the other angles that you could take or why this might appeal to a particular group who you didn't even consider. And so that little combination, that little workflow there has been incredible. It's shaved hours off of the amount of time it takes to do the newsletter. Regardless, with any publication, you are ultimately responsible for the stuff that you publish. So across the board, robust, intense and intentional human oversight and revision. We're not going to publish anything. We have our ethics policy we posted about generative AI on the site, and I encourage newsrooms to do that as well. Make it clear. Bring the community in and show them how you use these tools. Maybe they'll help you use them better. But when it comes in, we get the summaries, we discuss, we make the case for it, and then it goes into the newsletter after several editorial revisions. But that front end stuff, that at the beginning, it cuts so much time off of the sifting through, blah, blah, blah. And so I've seen a couple of news organizations take the newsletter summary approach and to sort of help them contextualize the work they're putting out that they do and the work that they're aggregating.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Like we were saying, even before we started recording, the ability of AI to see the trends that human sight would miss in the data that we're looking at or just the stories we're looking at. So it's a very unique way to use it. You kind of touched on misinformation in that answer, and that's one of the questions I have for you. It's one of the top concerns when it comes to AI. So can ChatGPT or other tools help local news combat misinformation, especially considering its own ability to create misinformation?
I think it can. I think was it Stephen Fry that said technology is a mirror? If an idiot looks into the mirror, an idiot's going to look back at you. I don't think the issue with misinformation has been, now there's going to be too much information out there on the internet for people to process. I think we've already blown past that point. So it is certainly going to, my biggest concern with it is doing it in combination with voice cloning software, for instance. So the speed and ease at which you can now generate very lifelike, and realistic sounding voice clones to impersonate people, I think is going to result in, number one, a lot more grandmas and grandpas buying Apple gift cards and Google Play gift cards for scammers who sound like their son or grandson or whatever. So that's huge. And as the response time for these prompts and generations becomes smaller, it's going to be much harder to tell. So a perfect example for politics reporting would be calls that go out that sound like a candidate A saying some very questionable things that go against his policy or her policy platform. And the correction is always less impactful than the original misinformation, right? It's still somewhat easy to detect some of this stuff if you know what you're looking for, but yeah, you really can't avoid that. And all of these AI, text generation detector tools, you've probably seen the examples where it considers the Constitution is 96% written by an AI. So there's still a lot to work out. And with any new technology, the bad actors are going to just slightly outpace the white hats or the good actors. That's with every virus software. But yeah, I mean, there are real concerns, not just about misinformation, but about these custom trained models, because once there are open source models that exist currently that rival or at least come close to GPT-3 and 3.5. I don't think anything's quite at GPT-4 level yet. So I'm much less concerned about people reading articles that have misinformation in them. I think we've got sort of like our fill of that. I don't think that's necessarily going to be a noticeable difference in that sense. I could be totally wrong, obviously. I'm much more interested or concerned with the malicious targeted activities that are going to be a lot harder to A, to detect and trace, and B, to detect from the victim. And again, even if you know it's from a bot, it's still hurtful. So that's what I'm really concerned about. And so I can see once these things, if they continue on the path to becoming easier to reproduce, it's cheaper to run and to operate, and better integrated into our daily systems, and harder to tell that they're fake. Yeah, we're going to run into some issues there. But I think, again, what are you going to uninvent it? We have to learn this stuff. We have to be aware of it. And I think that's what journalists can do that is going to be most useful, is to play with these things. I'm not saying you got to go out and subscribe and pay for all these new tools, but at least understand the fundamental structure of how to interact with these tools and the logic that they're built on. And that'll give you a much better sense of what they're capable of, what they're kind of capable of, and what they just can't do.
In a perfect world, what sort of utopia do you envision for how local newsrooms can utilize these tools?
Yeah, I think transparency, disclosure, and honesty. I think curiosity and humility are huge. If your newsroom if you're not an expert on this stuff, you still can use them, and you can just be open about it. Don't assume this position that I think a lot of news organizations traditionally have done, especially the sort of legacy media organizations, where there is never a time or a situation where they are not the arbiter of information on certain things, and they bring the members of the community that they purport to serve into the process at the very end and relegate them to the comment section. And there, Jen Brandel at Harkin talks about this, the sort of like design thinking for the journalism process and community engagement. The folks at CUNY, my alma mater, are big on engagement journalism. And the whole point of it is to involve people in the process of not just discussing and discoursing about your journalism, but in producing it, and give them a vested interest and a stake in how it's made, involve them in the process, open it up within reason, and allow them to help you build with them and not just for them. And so I think in my utopian vision, it would be a much more distributed and cooperatively governed situation. I think really you mentioned at the beginning, not to dump on your boss here, but you mentioned, my editor is really interested in this, so we're going to have more guests about this. And the idiom or the truism or whatever about news is what happens around the editor is true. Whatever the editor is interested in, that tends to be what gets covered. And I think that also trickles down into the way that we cover things and the way that we use these tools. It cannot be a top-down, one dude in a boardroom deciding on how this organization is going to use this new technology. It's not going away. And the best way to prevent or to buttress ourselves from the negative effects are to get together, work together, establish collaborative and cooperative principles for their use, systems and checks for verification and like conflict resolution when there's issues that arise. Really, it comes down to like, how would you feel if you were reading things and you didn't know where they came from, and then you found out, it was bad. I think I'll end with that. There's two things that I've been thinking about, and it's the two ways that I think why people read journalism, why they consume media. There are the people who want to consume it for the experience, the emotional journey, the narrative process and journey that they go on from a really good writer who has a way with words and can transport you to that space mentally through their writing, right? And then there's the people and the types of stories where we just need information. Like, I just want to know, when will the road be closed? When will the student loan payments resume? When will I have to do this? I don't need a 3-paragraph anecdotal lead. I don't need your personal narrative experience imbued into this text. I need information, and it's functional. And so if we can look at these tools as a way to enhance that side, the functional utilitarian aspect of the information we put out, and allow that with verification, obviously, and human oversight, and allow that to take some of those roles, the less glamorous, the less fun, the less engaging ones, allow that to supplement our efforts there. I think hopefully it'll allow the creativity, narrative structures to flourish on the other end of that, and we really get to see people, spread their wings, metaphorically speaking, and produce really good work without the burdens of also having to churn out bulleted lists all the time to keep the clicks up. So I think we're going to see hopefully a shift away from that and more towards a more harmonious use of this technology as it's integrated into more and more newsrooms.
Let's do a little bit of the mechanics here. So we got prompts for artificial intelligence. How do we make the most of those prompts? I know it involves asking a good question to get a good answer, but do you have any tips or tricks on that front?
Yeah, Ethan Mollick has a newsletter called One Useful Thing, and I have just ripped off and attributed appropriately so many of his thoughts because he's so smart when it comes to this stuff. He digs in really deep, and he talks about, I think people, and myself included, and I was looking through re-looking through the handbook yesterday to make sure I remember everything I wrote. And in the book, it's myself, like I talk about it from a very basic perspective of you can ask a question. It starts with a question, and Ethan says, yes, that's fine. Like prompts are useful in certain things, and if they're repetitive, repeatable and all that. But the most value I've gotten from it, and he makes this point, is the back and forth. So, as you play with these tools, you start to realize that, yes, there are certain things where I just need like, hey, write me this, paste the context, and it'll reorganize. Like clean up this email list, boom, put it in a bulleted list, whatever, put it in a table. But much more value I think you can get, and you can workshop this as well, is to go back and forth and ask these tools what they need from you in order to complete the task. Give it some objectives. Say, I want to do this. I need these specifications for it. What information would I need to give to you or what I need to gather in order for us to make this happen? And that opens up a whole new, realm of possibility. And the same thing goes for using it as a starting point for learning. So a lot of the things that I've learned or that benefits that I've gleaned from these tools have not necessarily been in their ability to generate things for me off the bat, but to know what the words are and the definitions of, like a glossary of terms for somebody who didn't go to business school. I don't have an MBA. I didn't know, somebody who's never been to business school might never have heard of a SWOT analysis. I mean, the number of acronyms alone that are out there that really represent these structures for how we organize information that you don't even know exist. And all you have to do for this is say like, hey, I want to do this. What are some common structures? What are some terms? How do people in the professional world of this type of thing, how do they do this? And I think that's going to lead to a lot more access for small newsrooms who don't have consultant money, who don't have the budget or the time to hire somebody to come in and drop 1 million buzzwords on them, make a strategic plan, and then they never execute it. Instead, you can at least start with these tools and say, what's the landscape for this type of activity look like? What are the words that people use and the vocabulary that they use to describe these kinds of things? There's a phrase, I don't know where it comes from. If you can name it, you can tame it. I think it's a therapy term. I know my therapist has used it in the past. And anytime I'm able to put a name to something or a face to something or whatever, it allows me to integrate that into my own mind, in my own repertoire. So now I know, I can do mermaid.js is a great text to visualization or diagram language where maybe I take a hierarchical list and I ask it to convert it to JMS or to mermaid.js. And now I have a flowchart of these and I can visualize it. So there's all these terms that I didn't even know existed, the unknown unknowns, if you will, that now I have access to. And I can say, oh, wow, an AAR, what's that? It's an after action review. Oh, that's a military term. I wonder if you can do an AAR or set up a template for an AAR for this event we just had. And now I have all these places where I can start to expand my understanding of how to organize that information and then act on that. So that knowledge-based stuff, and then also the back and forth stuff is really valuable in my opinion.
Little personal note, we're going to Europe this summer, and my husband, instead of reading through, those books you get from the library where it's like, this is what you should do when you go to this country, he just typed into ChatGPT, going to Europe for 7 days, where should we go, plan our itinerary, and it produced it, and then he could give it some feedback and it adjusted. So yeah,
it's wild to me how many travel and shopping plugins are on the Plus model now. I've almost never used them because I just that's not me. But I will say the other day I was at the gym and I've been doing the same exercises for back and buys over and over again, and I was just like, you know what? Write me up a little workout plan for back and biceps. And then I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to make it a stretching plan because I suck at stretching. Cool. 20-minute stretching plan. Cool. And it was just so fun. I felt like such a dork. I was like, for the love of God, nobody see me using ChatGPT at the gym because I can't handle that embarrassment. But it was useful. I did it. Cool. All right, let me do some supine bicycle or whatever, So it was really cool. It's very useful.
Well, my final question for you, this is something we asked all of our external guests, is to explain why everyday Americans should pay attention to the topic at hand. So the topic at hand obviously is generative artificial intelligence. So what is your pitch to them?
It's easy, it's free, it's fun, it's useful, and it can help you, get your work done without as much stress, and then allow you to focus more on messing around or doing whatever you want to do, or hiking or whatever. And it's not going anywhere. And it's going to make using the devices that are such an integral part of our life a much different. It's going to give you a whole new suite of tools to use, manipulate, and interact with the digital world that is essentially the hyper reality that we exist in.
Thank you for joining us today. And for our listeners, you can check out Joe's ChatGPT handbook in the link in our show notes and learn more about all the things that we chatted about. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, if you have any questions, comments, or love for Ballotpedia, feel free to send it to us at ontheballot@ballotpedia.org or on Twitter @Ballotpedia. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for listening.